Welcome in to life, love, and the rest of it, where the night slows down and the heart finally has room to speak, where the tea is warm, the light is low, and every story.
Good evening. This is life, love, and the rest of it. A space where we unpack life as it truly unfolds. The love we give and receive. The lessons that shape us and all the unexpected moments in between that nobody really prepares us for. Here is real conversations, real perspectives, and real people navigating real life. Settle in, take what speaks to you, and leave the rest, because this is life, love, and the rest of it. Before we get into today's topic, I want to be clear about something. This conversation is not about judging, shaming, or tearing down anyone's life choices. We understand that everyone's story is different. Relationships don't always go as planned. People grow, situations change, and life can be complicated. This podcast is about being honest, having real conversations, and looking at different perspectives, especially around parenting, relationships, and accountability. Some of what we might say may be uncomfortable, but our goal is to keep it respectful, thoughtful, and real. If anything resonates with you, take what applies and leave what doesn't. This is a space for dialogue, not division. Let's start with our grandmothers. I'm a 55-year-old woman, and I was raised by my mother and her sisters. My grandmother had 10 children. One passed away young. My mother is the third from the youngest. Now, when we look back at our grandmother's generation, we have to understand that the world was very different. Back then, most women were expected to marry before having children. And there was a heavy stigma attached to having children outside of marriage. Historically, data shows that in the 1940s, births outside of marriage were relatively low compared to today. For example, around that time, only a small percentage of births were to unmarried women, about a few percent among white women, and higher, but still a minority among black women. Also, before the 1960s, single-parent households were much less common overall, with only about 1 in 10 children living in single-parent homes. And even when single parenting did happen in earlier generations, it was often due to things like the death of a spouse rather than having children with multiple partners. In our grandmother's time, it wasn't as common or as accepted for a woman to have children by different men. That doesn't mean it never happened, but it usually stayed quiet or families stepped in to help raise the children. I noticed something else also. All my aunts and uncles were married. They had their children within their marriages. Now, some of them did remarry later on and had more children, but even then, it was still within the family structure. And that's important because back then, marriage wasn't just common, it was the standard. The majority of adults got married, and having children inside of marriage was the norm. If you go back and look at the data from around the 1940s and 1950s, you'll see that marriage rates were high and family life was centered around married couples raising children together. The traditional structure, husband, wife, and children, was considered the typical American family, especially during that time period. What I saw in my own family wasn't unusual. It was actually reflected what was happening in a lot of households back then. And I think that's important for us to understand, because when we compare then and now, we're really looking at two completely different worlds. Now let's talk about how things started to shift when we get to our mother's generation. because this is where things begin to change. See, by the time our mothers were coming into adulthood around the 1960s and 1970s, society was no longer the same, the same as it was for our grandparents. Oh, divorce started becoming more common. In fact, between 1960s and 1980, divorce rates more than doubled in the United States. What that means is families that would have stayed together in our grandparents' time were now breaking apart. At the same time, there was an increase in children being raised in single-parent homes. Back in the 1960s, only about 9% of children lived with single parents. But that number began to rise significantly in the decades that followed. And this shift wasn't just about relationships, it was about culture. People started thinking differently about marriage, independence, and what they were willing to accept or walk away from. For many of us, our mother's generation is where we start to see different things or different situations from what our grandparents built. Some families stayed intact, but others started blending, separating, and reforming in new ways. And this is where you begin to see more situations where children may have different fathers, or fathers may have different women, have several children with different women. Not because people didn't care, but because life started looking different. Now let's bring in today, because this is where things become even more layered. If our grandparents' time was about structure and our mother's time was about change, our time is about complexity. Today is more common to see women having children with different fathers and men having children with different women. That's just the reality we're living in now. Statistics show that the number of children living with single parents has increased significantly over time. But the 1960s, only about 9% of children lived in single parent homes. But that number grew around 28% by 2012. And that shift didn't happen overnight. It came from years of changing relationships, higher divorce rates, and more children being born outside of marriage. And I think it's important to understand that shift, because before we judge what we see today, we have to understand where the change actually began. And this conversation isn't just about women, because men are part of this too. We now see more men with children in multiple households, just like we see more women co-parenting with different fathers. But here's where it gets real. Society doesn't always judge those the same way. Women with more than one child father are often labeled, judged, or questioned. Meanwhile, men in the same situation may be seen differently, or sometimes questioned, sometimes not questioned at all. And that's where the conversation gets uncomfortable, but necessary. Now we have to ask ourselves, are we looking at the breakdown of family structure, or are we looking at an evolution of what family looks like? Why did things change? Now let's ask the real question. Why did society change drastically? One thought people often have is, was it because of migration? People moving north, getting closer to freedom, and things changing? Now, historically, we know that millions of black families did move from the south to the north between the 1910s and 1970s. About 6 million people during what's called the Great Migration. And yes, that movement changed a lot. Jobs, culture, opportunities, even how people live. But interestingly, research does not clearly support the idea that migration itself caused the breakdown of family structure. Some studies actually found that families who migrated often still maintained traditional two-parent households. It wasn't just about moving north. But then there's something else that hits closer to home for a lot of us: war. In my case, my mother and father were separated because my father was in the war. And historically, that wasn't uncommon. For a long time, one of the biggest reasons families became single-parent households was because of death, or separation due to war or other life circumstances. Men were gone for long periods of time. Some didn't come back, and some came back and were traumatized, and families had to adjust. But the biggest changes came from something even broader. Society itself started changing. Divorce became more accepted. Women gained more independence financially. Marriage stopped being something people felt they had to stay in. And having children outside of marriage became less stigmatized. All these changes together led to more single parent households over time. It wasn't just one thing, it was layers of change happening all at once. When we look at where we are today and we can't just say, this is wrong or this is right, what we're really looking at is the result of history, decisions, circumstances, and sometimes survival. And for some of us, it wasn't about choice at all. It was about what life handed our families. Now let's bring in both sides of this conversation, because this is not just about women and it's not just about men. It's about people and how life unfolds. When we talk about women who have children by more than one man, we have to ask why. Sometimes it's relationships that didn't work out, leaving unhealthy or unsafe situations, growth, realizing later that what they truly need, or simply life not going the way they planned. And when you look at it that way, it's not always about poor decisions. Sometimes it's about choosing to move forward instead of staying stuck. But let's talk about the other side too, men who have children with multiple women, because they exist in this conversation just as much. And again, we have to ask why. Multiple relationships over time, lack of commitment, not being ready for a family but still having children, or sometimes the same thing women go through, relationships that didn't last. The difference is society doesn't always hold men to the same level of accountability. A woman with multiple children, fathers may be judged, questioned, or labeled, while a man in the same situation may be seen as, that's just how it is, and that's something we can't ignore. But here's where we stay honest, respectfully. No matter if it's a man or a woman, when children are involved across multiple households, it can create challenges. Communication between parents, consistency for the children, financial responsibilities, emotional stability. And that doesn't make anyone bad, but it does make things more complicated. This conversation isn't about pointing fingers. It's about understanding choices, circumstances, and how those choices affect not just the parents, but the children too. It's not just about how many people are involved. It's about how everyone shows up. Now let's get into conflict, because this is where things can really get complicated and really real. I came across a conversation where a woman was saying that some men can't see their children, not because they're bad fathers, but because the mother doesn't like the woman he's with. And in this particular situation, the child had been around the couple before, but once they got married, everything changed. Now let me ask you something, because this part of the conversation isn't about judging anybody. It's about helping you think, slow down, and make choices that protect your future and your children's future. Ask yourself, are you creating a life your child can feel accepted in? Are you choosing partners, or are you choosing moments? Are you moving too fast because you want attention, or because you want stability? Are you thinking about the human you're bringing into the world before you act? Are you repeating what you saw growing up, or creating something better? Are you choosing love, or are you choosing to escape? Are you letting loneliness make decisions that love should be making? Are you building a future, or are you building a cycle? Because at the end of the day, this isn't about shaming you. This is about protecting you, guiding you, and reminding you that every choice you make today becomes a story your child has to live tomorrow. And if nobody ever told you this, let me be the one. You deserve stability. You deserve peace. You deserve a future that makes sense. And your children deserve a foundation that doesn't split their identity into three different directions. Before you move too fast, before you let loneliness talk louder than logic, before you let attention disguise itself as love, stop, think, and choose with your future in mind, not your moment. And when I heard that, I thought to myself, sometimes there's more to the story. Because situations like that doesn't usually come out of nowhere. It could be that feelings were still involved. Maybe there was a history there. Maybe expectations that things would work out differently in some cases. And I'm not saying this in every case. There could have been a situation where the man was still involved with both women at some point. And maybe the child's mother believed there was still a chance. But when marriage came into the picture, that made things final. But here's where the real problem comes in. When those emotions turn into actions that affect the child. Because at that point, it's no longer just about the adults. It's about the child losing access to a parent. And in situations like that, the intention might be to hurt the other adult, but the impact often falls on the child. That can bring up hurt, disappointment, even anger. To be fair, this isn't just something women do. There are men who let their feelings, pride, or new relationships affect how they show up for their children. Again, this isn't about pointing fingers. It's about recognizing how unresolved emotions can turn into decisions that have long-term effects. Adults may move on, relationships may change, but a child still needs both parents, as long as those parents are willing and able to be there. And when we allow hurt, jealousy, or disappointment to lead situations, we have to ask ourselves, who is really being affected most? Now let's talk about something else that plays a role in all of this. Lack of commitment. Because sometimes when we strip everything else away, the emotions, the situations, the stories, we have to ask, was there ever a real commitment to begin with? On both sides, men and women. You can have situations where people are having children without fully committing to each other. Not committed emotionally, not committed financially, and not committed long term. And when there's no solid foundation, what happens later? You get confusion. You get overlapping relationships. You get hurt feelings. You get situations where people think they're in something that the other person never truly committed to. When I hear a situation where a man can't see his child because of a relationship conflict, yes, emotions play a role. But I have to ask, was there ever clarity? Was there ever a commitment? Or were people just involved without a clear understanding of what it was? And again, this is not just in one person. A lack of commitment can come from someone not being honest about what they want, someone accepting less than they deserve, or both people participating in something without clear boundaries. And when a child comes into that, it complicates everything, because children don't come from confusion. And if the foundation isn't solid, the situation usually won't be either. Sometimes it's not just about who did what. It's about what was never established in the first place. Now let's talk about the part we can't ignore. What happens to the children? When children grow up in situations where there are multiple households, conflict, or instability, it can affect them in ways we don't always see right away. Studies show that children in single-parent or high-conflict environments may experience emotional stress, behavioral challenges, and sometimes struggles in school. But a lot of that doesn't simply come from having one parent. It often comes from things like financial pressure, limited time, and ongoing stress within the household. One of the biggest influences on a child's well-being is conflict between parents. When children are exposed to tension, arguments, or emotional distance between the adults in their lives, it can shape how they feel. how they behave, and even how they form relationships later on. And in today's world, many children are moving between households, spending time with mom, dad, and sometimes step parents, which can be especially challenging when there isn't consistency or cooperation between the adults. When we talk about baby daddy versus baby daddies, we're not just talking about adults and their choices. We're really talking about structure, stability, and consistency for a child. Because a child doesn't care about titles or labels. They care about who shows up, who loves them, and who is consistently there in their life. A child can grow up and thrive in any situation, whether it's one parent, two parents, or a blended family. But what truly makes the difference is stability, love, communication, and the ability of adults to put their personal issues aside. Children don't suffer simply because of divorce, blended families, or different living situations. They suffer from conflict, inconsistency, and absence. And when I look at the new generation, I see something different. I see growth, I see learning. I see more parents, especially our children, who are committed to their children, even when the relationship between the parents doesn't work. And I believe a lot of that comes from what they witnessed growing up. Sometimes the lessons we pass down aren't the ones we intentionally sit and teach. Sometimes they come from what our children saw us go through. In my case, I was a teenage mother. I had to learn along the way, and as I learned, I made it a point to be honest with my children. I talked to them about my mistakes, my experiences, and lessons that came with them, even when they didn't want to hear it. Because let's be honest, children don't always want to hear the truth in the moment. But as they grow, as they experience life for themselves, those same words come back, and I truly believe they start to understand. They start to think she was right. And that's where the change begins. When we talk about where we are today, yes, there are challenges. Yes, there are complex situations. But there is growth. There's a generation that is trying to do better, be more present, and show up for their children in ways that maybe weren't always modeled for them. And to me, that matters. There are many different scenarios we could talk about when it comes to this subject. Many layers, many stories, but at some point, the why and the who don't matter as much as what we do moving forward. This conversation is really about awareness. It's about understanding how our choice ripple into the people's lives, especially the children. This is an adult conversation, but it's all life conversation. And if it reaches someone younger with guidance, that's not a bad thing. Because the truth is, sometimes people don't always hear their parents. Sometimes they listen better to voices outside of their home, especially when they feel like their parents' experiences don't reflect where they want to be. And even though some may hear this and think, this is obvious, you'd be surprised how many people quietly sit with conversations like this, thinking, reflecting, and making different decisions because something finally clicked. When it comes to relationships, intimacy, and bringing life into the world, those are not small decisions. Pick and choose wisely who you allow into that space. Take your time, and if your personality leads you to live freely, then live responsibly in that freedom. Protect yourself and protect others. And if you ever find yourself not thinking about you in that moment, at least think about the other person, their life, their responsibilities, and who they may be connected to. Because everything is connected, whether we acknowledge it or not. Having children outside of marriage is a personal choice, but it's not one that comes with a level of strength and that many people don't fully understand until they're in it. It can't be beautiful. It can be beautiful. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm rushing. Yes, but it can be stressful and at times chaotic. There are situations where people create peace and co-parent in healthy ways, for the sake of their children, and those are the moments we respect. But we have to be honest, many situations come with complications, emotional strain, and instability that children end up feeling. It's important to pause, to think before you leap. And this isn't just for the young, it's for the adults too. For anyone still moving forward life without considering the bigger picture. Because it's never just about the moment. It's never just about the person you're with. It's about everything that comes with that decision, the lives connected to it, and the impact that can follow. But even in all of this, there is growth. I look at the next generation, our children, and I see something different. I see people trying harder to be present, to be involved, to be committed to their children, even when the relationship doesn't work out. And I truly believe a lot of that comes from what they saw growing up. And while I have shared parts of my story here, I'm putting my full journey into a book where I go deeper into my personal experiences, the lessons I've learned, and the realities that shape my perspectives. Because sometimes in a conversation, I can start, or you can start, the thought. But a story can really make you feel and understand it. When we look at where we are today, yes, there are challenges. Yes, there are complicated situations, but there is awareness, there is reflection. There's a generation trying to do better with what they've been given. And that is what this is really about. Life, love, and the rest of it. Now, this conversation doesn't stop here because there is much more to unpack. In our next episode, we're going to focus on the fathers, their presence, their responsibility, their accountability, and what it really means to show up beyond just the title. We'll talk about absence and how that affects everything connected to it. Then 2 weeks after that, we're going to sit with the mothers, their strength, the weight they carry, the choices they make, and how they create stability even in the middle of complicated situations. Within each of these episodes, we're going to go deeper, talking about accountability, absence, pressure, choices, and what it really looks like to parent in today's world where things aren't always traditional. And for these next episodes, I want you to come prepared. Get your journal, get your tablets, get whatever you use to write things down, because we're not just listening, we're reflecting. We're journaling, we're asking questions, and we're giving our honest opinions. Don't be afraid to share your thoughts. Leave a comment on Spotify or YouTube. Life, love, and the rest of it. Your voice matters. I'm still new to this, and your ideas, your feedback, your perspective, they are important to me and always will be, no matter where we go on this podcast journey. Catch up on the episodes, share them, and meet me back here. The next episode, Fathers Only, will air on July 23rd at 8 p.m. right here on Spotify. The Mothers Only will follow 2 weeks later at 8 p.m. We're going deeper together. Be mindful of the life you're creating, because every choice you make today can become someone else's story. Life is not always what we plan. Love doesn't always go as we dream. And sometimes the rest of it is where the real lessons are seen. And choices made and voices unheard, and truths we lived by never said, in the moments we carry quietly long after the tears are shed. But growth lives there. In the in-between, in the lessons we learn along the way, in the strength we build from yesterday, and the hope we choose for today. We speak, we reflect, we learn, we grow. And through it all, we begin to know this is life, this is love. and all the rest of it. And I'm Iris, your host.